This story is based on a real incident, based by my friend's big brother. Please subscribe, like and share with your friends and family members to chill down their spines. I've always loved driving at night. There's something calming about the darkness, the quiet roads, and the hum of the engine as the world slips by outside. But after what happened to me last week, I don't think I'll ever feel that way again. It was a Thursday night, and I was driving back home from a work trip. The highway stretched out before me, a long ribbon of asphalt illuminated by my headlights. Clock on the dashboard read 11:45 p.m., and I figured I had about an hour left to go before I reached my town. The radio was playing softly in the background. I felt relaxed as I drove. The sky was clear, and the stars were out, twinkling above the treetops that lined the highway. There were hardly any other cars on the road, just the occasional truck rumbling past in the opposite direction. About 30 minutes into the drive, I noticed the road signs were becoming less familiar. I'd taken this route dozens of times before, so I knew I was going the right way. Something felt off. The signs seemed older, worn, and the names of towns I didn't recognize started appearing. I figured I was just tired and didn't think much of it. I kept driving, my mind drifting as the miles ticked by. The first real sign that something was wrong came when I saw the car. It was an old, rusted sedan parked on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking dimly. I slowed down as I passed by, catching a glimpse of a woman standing next to it. She was wearing a long coat, face hidden by the shadows. She didn't wave or signal for help, just stood there, staring at the road. I considered stopping, but something about her made me uneasy. There was no other traffic around, and the thought of pulling over in the middle of nowhere didn't sit right with me. So I drove on, glancing in the rearview mirror as I went. That's when I noticed she was watching me. Even as I sped up, her figure grew smaller in the mirror, but she didn't move. Just stood there, her eyes following me until I turned a bend, and she disappeared from view. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me after that. The road seemed darker somehow, the trees on either side pressing in closer. I turned up the radio to drown out my thoughts, but the signal was starting to fade, leaving only static and brief snatches of music. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road ahead, but then I saw something else, a sign. It was an old wooden sign, its paint faded and peeling. I slowed down to read it as I drove by. "Welcome to Coldwater." That Coldwater. I'd never heard of it, and I knew there wasn't any town by that name on my route. My heart started to pound in my chest. Had I taken a wrong turn somewhere? Was I lost? I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands trembling as I reached for my phone. I opened the GPS, but the screen just showed a spinning circle. No signal. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but there was nothing, just the dark highway stretching out in both directions, the trees looming over it like silent sentinels. I decided to turn back, thinking maybe I'd somehow missed a turnoff or an exit. As I started the car and pulled back onto the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see that woman from the broken-down car. The road behind me was empty. Minutes passed and the unease grew. I kept expecting to see familiar landmarks, anything that would reassure me I was heading in the right direction. But there was nothing. Just the endless road, the oppressive darkness, and the ever-present feeling that something was wrong. Then, out of nowhere, my headlights caught something in the distance. At first, it was just a vague shape, but as I got closer, I realized it was another car. Relief washed over me. Maybe I wasn't alone out here after all. But as I approached, I recognized the car. It was the same rusted sedan I'd seen earlier, parked in exactly the same spot. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. How could this be? I'd driven miles in the opposite direction, yet here it was again, like I'd never left. The woman was still there too, standing beside the car, her face still hidden in the shadows. This time she moved. She took a step forward, towards the road, her head tilting slightly as if she were trying to get a better look at me. Panic surged through me, and I floored the gas pedal, speeding past the car. As I flew by, I caught a glimpse of her face. It was pale, almost ghostly, her eyes wide and unblinking. She didn't look surprised or scared, just blank, like she was staring right through me. I drove as fast as I could, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? How was that car in the same place? I tried to think of a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. I just wanted to get out of there, to find some sign of civilization, anything familiar. The road seemed endless. No matter how far I drove, it felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. Trees, the darkness, all looked the same. The radio had given up entirely, just static now, filling the car with its eerie hiss. I don't know how long I drove like that, but eventually, I saw something up ahead. Lights. Relief flooded through me as I realized it was a gas station, its neon sign glowing faintly in the distance. I slowed down as I approached, the sense of dread lifting slightly. The station looked old, but it was open. The lights were on, and I could see a figure moving inside the small convenience store. I pulled up to the pump and got out, my legs shaky beneath me. I just needed to ask for directions, figure out where I was and how to get back to the highway. I walked into the store, the bell above the door jingling as I entered. The man behind the counter looked up, his expression unreadable. He was older, with deep lines etched into his face and gray hair sticking out from under a worn cap. "Evening," he said, voice gruff. "What can I do for you?" I think I'm lost," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was driving on the highway and I must have taken a wrong turn. Can you tell me how to get back?" The man didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then he shook his head. "There's no highway around here. Not for miles." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. But that can't be right. I was just on it. He sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "You must have gotten turned around. Happens sometimes, especially at night. Roads out here, they play tricks on you." I swallowed hard, trying to process what he was saying. "Is there a map or something I can look at?" He nodded and reached under the counter, pulling out a tattered old map. He spread it out in front of me, pointing to a spot. "You're here, in Coldwater. Closest town is about 20 miles that way." He pointed to another spot on the map. Coldwater. That name again. I stared at the map, but it didn't make any sense. I'd never seen any of these places before. It was like I'd driven into a completely different part of the state, or maybe even somewhere else entirely. "I just need to get back to the highway," I said, my voice trembling. "Please, how do I get out of here?" The man looked at me for a long moment, then folded up the map and handed it to me. "Follow the road out of town. Don't stop no matter what you see. Just keep driving. You'll find your way back." There was something in his voice, a seriousness that sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't ask any more questions. I just nodded, thanked him, and hurried out of the store. As I got back in my car and started the engine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced around. The gas station was empty, the night silent except for the wind rustling the leaves. Pulled out onto the road and drove, following the man's directions. The road was narrow and winding, and the darkness seemed even thicker now, pressing in on all sides. I kept my foot on the gas, my eyes glued to the road ahead, too afraid to look in the rearview mirror. I don't know how long I drove, but eventually the trees began to thin and the road widened. And then, just like that, I saw it. The highway. Relief flooded through me as I merged onto it, the familiar signs and lights guiding me home. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. I sat in the car for a long moment, just trying to process what had happened. It all felt like a bad dream, something out of a nightmare. But when I reached into my pocket and pulled out the map the old man had given me, I knew it had been real. The map was there, its edges worn and tattered. The name, Coldwater, scrawled across the top in faded ink. I don't know what happened that night, whether it was some sort of strange time loop, place forgotten by the world, something far more sinister. But one thing is certain, I've never felt comfortable driving at night since then. The next day, I tried to look up Coldwater online to see if it was a real town. But there was nothing. No records, no mentions, not even a trace. It was as if the place didn't exist. Yet the map, now sitting on my desk, was proof that it did, or at least that I had been there. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had stopped for that woman, or if I hadn't found the gas station. The memory of her pale, expressionless face still haunts me, especially when I'm alone on a dark road. I haven't taken that route again, and I've made a habit of avoiding night drives altogether. Because now, every time I see a shadow on the side of the road or catch a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror, I can't help but think of cold water. And I can't shake the feeling that one day, I might end up back there, no matter how hard I try to avoid it. And if I do, I might not be so lucky next time.